Hello and welcome to the History of Bangalore with me, Ramjee Chandran. Not only are we in episode 36 of season 1, but also at the beginning of a new chapter in our history as we explore the kingdom of the Hoysalas. Not long before 1000 AD, the Hoysalas came down from Malnad, the hilly tracts of the Western Ghats, and grew into a major military force and eventually went on to defeat the Choras and the Western Chalukyas and then rule much of the Deccan for centuries. They established a dynasty that would leave its stamp on the southern Deccan and a culturally indelible mark on our history. Starting with this episode, I will break down the rise and eventual fall of the Hoysalas. But first, as always, I would be remiss if I did not pause to acknowledge the prestige group whose support makes this podcast possible. Building cities one landmark at a time, they transform dreams into reality. You can be a part of the future. Simply add prestige to your life. In the Chennakeshava temple in Belur is a beautiful sculpture of a beautiful woman, one of the many steles attached to the temple walls. Steles are upright slabs that are decorated with relief sculptures, and in Belur, these steles are better known locally as Madanikas. These steles aren't just projections from the temple walls, they are standalone masterpieces, locked into place with a clever stone locking system. And they depict female figures carved into these steles that number 42 in total. Among these, 6 steles at Belur focused on the theme of the female hunter, 4 large and 2 smaller. The one I picked to refer to is a striking image that shows the hunter as she is poised to strike. You can see that she is about to fire an arrow at 2 birds perched on a treetop, and the pose suggests that her bowstring has been drawn taut. The sculptor captures that moment of perfect tension. Her 3/4 profile gives her depth. The diagonal lines of her arms and right leg create a rhythm that's balanced by her backward inclined head and left leg. Her perfect, bare-breasted figure is alluring. It feels like time is frozen in that split second before she releases the arrow. You can see the fascinating detail in her ornate skirt, the way her necklaces swing as she draws the bow. All the tension caught in mid-motion. It's breathtaking if you simply pause to take it all in. This isn't just a sculpture, it's a poem caught in stone. This Madanika is someone who is inspired by legend, and she is someone who goes on to inspire more of them. Let me tell you how. One of the inset stories attached to her is the story of the god Venkateshwara. Now, this is a story that is claimed by various people across the south, but they're all about how the god Venkateshwara fell in love with a hunter goddess, pursued, courted, and married her. The mainstream story is that while Venkateshwara appeared in the form of Vishnu, the hunter goddess actually is Padmavati or Lakshmi who came to earth in this form. I have heard one version that this story is related to the Madanika at Belur, but no matter which story you follow, it results in the two getting married. And their union is celebrated with celestial pomp. But to fund this grand wedding, Venkateshwara is said to have borrowed money from Kubera, the god of wealth, and that remains a debt being repaid even today through offerings at the Tirupati temple by thousands of devotees. Now, it's tempting to descend into recounting legend after captivating legend, but I must resist and stay with the history of the Hoysalas. But what is even more tempting is to make the connection between that sculpture of the hunter goddess and the geographical origins of the Hoysalas. It stands to reason, given their origins in the Malnad, present-day Malnad, that the Hoysalas were a tough hill people for whom hunting was most likely a way of life. This contrasted with the lifestyle of those dwelling in the plains, particularly in the fertile flood basin of the Kaveri, and they were all farmers and landed gentry. To understand the Hoysalas, it is important to understand their geography. Beyond the forests towards the east lay the great plateau of the southern Deccan. And this featured 3 vast clearings which can easily be identified on the map, and they correspond first to the modern Bangalore and Kolar districts in the east, second, the area between the Vedavati and Pinakani rivers in the north, and third, a broad stretch covering the present-day Hassan and parts of Mysore, Kadur and Tumkur. The last clearing, Hassan, Mysore, Kadur, Tumkur, was the staging area for the Hoysalas in their rule. This region was characterized by scattered lofty hills dotted here and there, but a relatively flat, lightly wooded landscape, and this served as the backdrop for the early activities and the rise of the Hoysala dynasty. It was here that they established their initial power base and began their ascent in history. West of this area, where the plains gradually sloped northwards, starting from the elevated region, was the hilly terrain from which the Hoysalas came down in the 11th century to rule right through to the middle of the 14th. Like every other dynasty in the south, the Hoysalas too tried to give themselves a Puranic origin. There was some dabbling in it, and some attempt to give themselves an exotic, non-local background. So they traced their lineage back to the Puranas and claimed descent from the Yaduvamsha, the lunar dynasty, which is also called the Chandravamsha. Specifically, they claimed to be of the Yaduvamsha line, which is a branch of the Chandravamsha, and included the Yaduvamsha prince Krishna. A rather poetic inscription found on a stone to the left of the Mukhamantapa, or the main hall, of the Chennakeshava temple in the Chikamagalur area, this is not the one in Belur, is evidence of this claim. And the inscription reads, "From Yadu, many Yadavas are born. Victorious is Krishna, able in bearing up the burden of the earth in his powerful arms. From him many illustrious kings arose. Among such kings at a certain time arose Sala, with the rays of glory like the moon, an ornament of the lunar line. His valor dried up the countries of his enemies." This is hyperbole at its best, with rather tenuous and disconnected links to say that Krishna had many successors and one of them was Sala, with giving nothing in between. So it is not a surprise that many historians, including William Coelho, have dismissed the Prashasti writer's attempt to connect the Yaduvamsa with the Hoysala clan as rather tenuous and being poetic fantasies. And the legend of North Indian origins was apparently invented during the time of Vishnuvardhana. Now, to be fair, this has been the practice of almost every South Indian dynasty to tie their origins to the mythical and the mystical. But the more likely origin is that they were from Malnad. Specifically, their ancestral home was Sosevur. In Sanskrit texts, this place was referred to as Shashakapura. Shashakapura in Sanskrit translates to rabbit town, but I'm not sure if the original Kannada name, Sosevur, meant rabbit town in Hale Kannada. In any case, these are all names for the present-day town of Angadi, located in the Western Ghats as the hills slope west towards the Kerala border. In terms of their faith, the Hoysalas were first Jains, and Sosevur was the location where the founder of the dynasty, called Sala, was supposed to have killed a tiger. Some say it was a lion. Anyway, it was at the command of his guru. It is a famous, though undocumented story, and this legend has lived through the centuries. And like most legends, it has grown wings and taken flight, but it has been commemorated in sculpture, folklore, prose and verse, and the tiger is featured on the Hoysala flag. So therefore, plausible or not, this is not a story that can be dismissed easily. And I will get to this interesting story right after a short and very necessary commercial break. Back in 30 seconds, stay right where you are.
Maximum connectivity, maximum luxury, maximum lifestyle. Live your max at Prestige Raintree Park. Opulent residences nestled in 21 acres of breathtaking landscape with 1 lakh plus square feet of clubhouse, 3 swimming pools and ample leisure and sports amenities. Experience exquisite living at Prestige Raintree Park in prime Whitefield with schools, offices, hospitals and shopping malls just a hop away. Call 81399 81399 or visit prestigeconstructions.com to know more. RADA approved.
The area in which Angadi stands is pretty. It is as you would expect from most hilly tracts. it is also an area of dense forests, jungles, that have coexisted alongside rural farming settlements for as long as we can record. Actually, the entire southern forest belt, which starts south of Mysore and expands outwards across the three states of Karnataka, Tamil Nadu and Kerala, is home to a rich variety of wildlife. Angadi is located only 25 kilometers southwest of Belur. Judging by available evidence, it has been the center of Jainism. The remains of many temples, particularly one on a hilltop, is testament to that. Speaking of the one above the hilltop, the legend of the Hoysalas has it that one day, in this forest, a young man was in the presence of his guru, a Jain Muni called Sudatta. This legend becomes different in detail from this point onwards, but the core of the story remains that out of the forest appeared a tiger. One variant of this lion, but tigers exist in the area even today, so we'll stick with tiger. Also, the Hoysalas put their tiger on the royal insignia, although in some other depictions, a beast with a mane is shown. Now, it could be that artists have interpreted it differently over the years, and then those interpretations have been picked up as fact and stories built on them. You know how it goes. Back to the story. While guru and disciple were either walking in the forest or resting in the basadi, there appeared the tiger. And it must have been apparent that this tiger was a threat because there was alarm. Sudatta turned to the young man, handed him a stick and shouted, Hoysala. Loosely in Hale Kannada, it translates to hit it, Sala. Obeying his guru's command, the tough young man of the hills, Sala, picked up the stick and used it as a weapon to defend them against the tiger. As one can expect, the story plays fast and loose from here on. But according to one version, the lad was so happy in his victory that he hoisted the slain tiger up on the stick and raised it into the air. A Silashasana, or stone inscription, dating back to 1190 reads, When the tiger rushed out of the forest, the Muni saying Hoysala at that moment, Sala, piercing it, dragged it along, and in a wonderful manner raised up the tiger on one point of his iron rod, which thence stood for his banner. When the Hoysala dynasty started to develop its royal trappings, the tiger became their symbol, and it was featured on the royal pennant. And bearers of the pennant marched proudly, the tiger on the pennant held aloft in commemoration of that event. One can probably guess which parts of the story are unlikely completely, maybe all of it, or maybe some of it is rooted in an aspect of truth, and maybe a tiger did show up and maybe there was or wasn't a fight. It does not matter how true the story is. It goes to the heart of the Hoysala narrative and proudly remains a testament and example of the hardiness and the bravery of the hill people, unafraid to face the worst odds in conflict, an attribute that is the most sought after in a king, over everything else. The canned stories of the Hoysalas are well known, their war, their valor, but little is told about their rough and tumble origins as hill people, whose former life was not only humble but harsh, and always in contrast with the lives of the folk in the plains that lay below them. The plains dweller could have been a Brahmin managing royal affairs, or living in a retirement in an agrahara. He was a Jain merchant running a trade hub under the Nanastesi guild, or he was a Gabunda, the village headman, the landlord with tenants, or the always toiling farmer. They all had one thing in common though, they feared the hill dweller. Living in rugged terrain and leading a life so different, the hill dweller was a constant threat preying on those who lived in the plains. The hill dwellers could take nothing about their existence for granted, like the plains people could. Their life was dictated by an awful hostile geography. Existence was tough and unstructured. Families were often cut off from each other for months on account of swollen streams during the summer rains. And their connection to the outside world was rare and rarely friendly. Even the crop they grew was on uneven land, so the food they ate had to come from an extra effort. They hunted forest animals and they traded sandalwood and timber with the merchants who worked in the plains below. Now for sustenance though, They frequently raided nearby farms and villages and made off with cattle and draft animals, and sometimes the women. It was not uncommon in the day for cattle raids to extend to the abduction of women. The brawn of the hill people often outmatched their victims, and it made them a persistent worry for the authorities in the plains. This was not a mere annoyance. This was unimaginable terror faced by the citizens every single day. So what did these authorities do about that? They co-opted them, and they engaged them as guards and mercenaries. Co-opting brigands into one's personal forces was a known practice. Examples can be found right from the Kamandakya Nitisara, a manual of statecraft said to have been authored by Kamandaka, a disciple of Chanakya, right down to the British employing the Pathans as soldiers of fortune to fight other Afghans. But for the people in the Deccan, the hill tribes had another use. They could also guard the territory against attack by wildlife. Tales were legion of their ability to get into bare-handed combat with tigers, and that finds mention in more than one inscription. And this cycles us back to the tale of Sala, that brave chieftain prince who saved his guru and went on to create a dynasty that would rule for centuries. Now, the origins of the Hoysalas was principally near the source of the Vedavati river in the damp and dank mountain recesses above the fertile plains. They inhabited a territory that included the key trade routes from Mangalore, which intersected with the others at Belur, which became a major trade hub at the foot of the hills. But by the attractions of domestication and by the lure of a more settled and less isolated existence, the gradual movement of the hill tribes towards the plains had started to happen. And by, the integration of the hill tribe with the settled community of the plains resulted in them becoming a visible part of daily life. The integration of the hill people into polite society clearly underwent a change for the better, from being a social curiosity to becoming rulers of the entire land. And a great example of this is to be found in what one historian called a Sanskrit conceit. There's a verse by an anonymous poet, but I will read my translation into English and spare you the burden of listening to my bumbling Sanskrit pronunciation. And it goes, "In Balala's city, a realm of earthly grace, Kirattas wander, serene and free. On Khadira's peak, jewels brightly trace like peacock's eyes, a dazzling sight to see. Bees, drawn to nectar, golden and sweet, carry pollen's burden, a smoky fleet." The telling phrase in this is, Kirattas wander serene and free. The Kirattas were the hill people who had for long years terrorized the townsfolk and the villages with their belligerence, and now they roam serene and free. Now, since Balala, who's mentioned in the poem, was a Hoysala, and even to stretch a point, the Kirattas were a kin of his, the imagery it evokes is of a feared and probably loathed community of people being slowly drawn into general society and slowly becoming gentrified as soldiers and guards and being accepted in the midst of everyone else in villages and towns. When the stories of the Hoysalas are told, often they go straight into the tiger-killing episode and then, without taking too much of a pause, rush headlong into tales of Vinayaditya's military prowess and those of his illustrious successors like Vishnuvardhana. They were celebrated as being glorious people, encouraging art and literature, and were the cause of some of the most beautiful temples from anywhere in history. And then again, there are the descriptions of them as brave, despising death, pugnacious and warlike to a degree, sometimes approaching bloodthirstiness. Yes, the Hoysalas were tough hill people. But in this episode, I have tried to show them as also being human, with ambitions for a better life, a peaceful life, and a desire to be accepted as part of society, no different from you or I. The Hoysalas were people who braved the dank and treacherous terrain of their own homes, working assiduously to raise their lot from being despised and feared hill people to becoming the highly cultured rulers of the southern Deccan that we know them to be today. And I will declare that I have succeeded if I have been able to convey the humanity of the Hoysalas, even modestly. The next few episodes will be a mini-series on the Hoysalas. What you just heard was part 1. It will be so much fun to explore this amazing dynasty and where they went with it for the better part of 300 years. All that excitement is coming soon. I am Ramjee Chandran, and this is the History of Bangalore.